Hello everyone, Zelleranth here, and today I thought we'd kind of take a little bit of a look at Faye. Now I don't want to do a complete rundown of her kit here, but I want to kind of give an idea of what she is within the game because she is a unit that you should be planning for now if you're wanting to look at going into building a physical team in the future. One of the biggest reasons is she is a unit that we will get one free copy of, but she will also be added to the standard banner, which means when she comes out, you will be able to select her on the rate up as the unit to target if you want to get her. And so what that means is that if you're set with where you want to be currently with your standard units, like with my situation, my biggest thing that I've been telling people is getting a V3 QJ and a V2 Tololo should be kind of your goals right now if you're wanting to go to the meta side of things in terms of getting the best bang for your buck on dupes on the standard characters. And after that point, it's kind of making the decision on whether you want what you want to target within the standard banner. Do you want to try and get pre to the V6 just for Clue K if you're going to be heavily investing in Clue K? If you're wanting to go heavily into electric, you can target going after that V6 on Mosin Nagant. Now looking at physical, getting upgrades here, I know a lot of people are now really liking the idea of going in the direction of physical. And so if you've already got your V3 QJ as well as V2 Tololo, I think that's an opportunity for you to actually just start staving your standard pulls at this point and kind of waiting until she actually comes out so you have another nice stockpile of standard pulls that you can utilize to try and get some dupes of her. So I thought we'd kind of take a look at her and kind of what she supplies to the team. Now, this is just taking it from a meta level type deal. If you have specific things or targets you want to get after you have a V3 QJ and V2 Tololo, that's completely fine. You will be getting a free copy of Faye, so it's not like you're going to miss out on her if you don't save up for her. But this is a good way to min-max your standard pulls, but it is a very long-term strategy. Now, with Faye, one of the big things is, we already know with Yuhi, a big thing is all about that physical defense reduction and being able to exploit some of her skills for that. And we have a lot of that within Faye's kit, as well as the ability to buff up physical damage received. And we see that here with her this one ability that is it's more like two abilities that are kind of core to her entire kit, which is going to be this laceration. And this is a permanent debuff that goes on the enemy. Unless, well, there's a skill that removes some of it, but it is permanent. It won't fall off if you don't use the skill that removes it. And just having it on them, one stack of it increases physical damage received by whatever the target is by 30%. That alone makes her extremely good for the physical team. But then also for her, if you actually go down into her ultimate down here on the bottom, not her ultimate, her passives, it kind of deals with what that laceration actually is for her. So when attacking, ignores 2% times the number of stacks of laceration of the enemy's defense and restores HP equivalent of 16% max HP and 2% of the number of stacks of laceration. And then if you read at the bottom here, at the end of enemy's action, if the enemy is within 6 tile radius of Faye, one big thing about Faye is you're going to want her to be close to the enemy. And with the hardest content being the platoon boss, it's actually not that hard to just stay close to them to trigger all these kind of things for them. Increases her contamination gauge by 1, applies 1 stack of laceration on the target, and then deals physical damage equivalent of 80% attack and 2 stability to it. If the enemy is within a 3 tile radius, increase contamination by 1 point, applies 2 stacks of laceration to enemy within the 3 tile, and deals AoE physical damage equivalent to 60% and with stability. Now, the big thing where you can kind of start seeing where dupes come into a pretty big deal for her is her V1's pretty nice in that it increases that defense ignore multiplier over each stack of laceration by 2%. So now it's a 4% that you can get on it. So that's pretty significant there, as well as when you have that up here, you can get up to 8 stacks. So if you can get that so 32 defense reduction there. And I believe, just reading it, this only applies to Faye. So that part is only for her, but she is going to be able to do significant damage herself. She's not going to be anything crazy. She's not like your mainstay damage dealer, but it is always nice to get damage out of your other units as well that are supplying support. And then we have that. So that's like the biggest thing I think you're going to want to save up for is this V1, just because that defense ignore. But then we could take a look at her other skills here and how you can also take more advantage of laceration, as well as the other big one here, which is open wounds. I mean, you have your standard basic attack here up at the top. The second skill here is skill AoE debuff. This one is a stability damage of 2, no cooldown, but it does consume 1 contamination gauge or confectants index. Nothing too crazy on that. And this one you should be able to use pretty much every turn if you want to. This one will consume all contamination gauge points. For each contamination gauge point consumed, applies 1 stack of laceration. So this is a big, easy way to get a bunch of those stacks on them. To all enemies within a 3-tile radius of self, pulls the enemies towards them, and deals AoE physical damage equivalent of 80% attack, and then movement failure for 1 turn. And then she gets extra steps after that, so she can get out of the way. So that's one way that you can apply a lot of those stacks right on the enemy right off the bat. And like I said, you just need 1 single stack. So just casting this immediately will put that on them, and it gives that 30% physical damage increase. And then that one, and after that you have her other skill, Pyroclastic Surge. Increases contamination gauge by 2 points. So right there's a way to get contamination gauge up. And then select an enemy target within a 6-tile radius and applies 2 stacks of laceration, so it'll put laceration on them, and then deals physical damage equivalent of 120% attack. Nice little way to put those on them there. And then her ultimate here, selects an enemy target within 6-tile radius, applies equivalent number of stacks of open wounds, and number of stacks of laceration, as the number of stacks of laceration held on all enemies within a 6-tile radius of self, and deals physical damage equivalent to 160% attack to the target. If the target has 6 or more stacks of laceration, consumes all 6 of those stacks of laceration, and increases a damage dealt by this attack by 120%. So this is where, if you can get a ton of them, you'll pull off the 6 stacks of laceration, but it'll do a massive amount of damage. Now, one negative of that is that you're always going to want to at least have 1 stack on them for the 30% physical damage increase. So you wouldn't cast this until you have more than 6 or 7 or 8, basically. But that's really nice there. But the big thing this is kind of the main reason I'm doing this for people planning out their pulls for standard. Because usually I don't really like covering characters that are quite far ahead. But since this is something you want to kind of think about now with the standard banner, that's why we're going over it. And that's going to be her dupes. Being a standard unit, this is one that you can plan for dupes even as a free-to-play. So they are quite important to think about. So we already looked at the first one, which I think was the biggest one, which is it makes it now where it has that 2% defense ignore, which is really big within the whole physical team with Yuhi there. The second one here is increases the damage multiplier by 20% after skill use. If the target has 4 or more stacks of laceration, applies the equivalent number. So however many stacks of laceration they have, which is up to 8, it'll apply the same number of stacks of open wounds. And then, so if they have 8, it'll apply 8 stacks of open wounds with the second one. What open wounds is at the end of action, for each stack held, the holder receives a fixed damage equivalent of 8% of the caster's attack. So the one big thing is you're going to want a lot of attack on Faye for this. And then it consumes 2 stacks of open wounds. It's considered a debuff. Now, one thing I don't see on this is I do not see a limit on the number of stacks. But it is something where they're going to slowly fall off. But the thing is, if you have 8 stacks of laceration and you just keep utilizing that skill, it seems like you can get a ton of stacks of these on there. And I mean, it can really add up to the amount of attack you can do. So I'm guessing there is a limit to that. But that is a pretty big attack. That is just like it's almost like a dot attack. And then it just takes 2 stacks off. So that's a nice one to get there just for some extra damage there. Then you have the third one, which is at the end of phase action, applies movement failure to all enemies within 1 turn, increases damage dealt. Nothing too crazy there. Movement failure is nice for the CC, which might be important more here in the future. But a little bit extra damage. Nothing crazy on that one. And then we have upgrade 4 now, which on that skill, no survivors. Instead of applying open wounds on all nearby enemies with laceration, Faye applies 4 stacks of open wounds on all enemies, and then applies additional stacks of open wounds equivalent to the number of stacks. So this is where it can just start. You can start really ramping up those open wound stacks. That does a lot of damage with her. At the end of action, the effects of open wounds are triggered, but no open wound stacks will be consumed. That one on her V4 seems like it's going to be huge because, like I said, I'm not seeing a limit on them, and I couldn't get an answer on it yet. I'll pin it up in the comment once I get an answer on if there is a limit to the number of stacks for open wounds. But the fact that at V4 there is no losing them after they're utilized makes me kind of think that you can just keep stacking these, and this attack just gets, like, the open wounds damage just gets stronger and stronger. So we'll kind of have to see with that, because that can be a way to really ramp up her damage, especially alongside the entire physical team with Yuhi. And then you have a V5, increases damage multiplier by 20%, increases the duration of movement failure and shadow step by 1 turn. After skill usage, dispels all defense type debuffs and movement type debuffs from self. So makes it where she can basically remove debuffs on herself quite easily. Makes it a little bit stronger, but it's nothing too crazy on that one on her V5. But then the V6 is the effects applied when the target has 6 or more stacks of laceration are changed. So now this is the one where it consumes the 6 stacks on the ultimate. Consumes 6 stacks of laceration. For each stack of laceration held by the target, increases damage dealt by 20% up to a maximum of 160%, and then increases crit rate by 5%. And crit damage by 2%, so it's 6 stacks, so that's basically 30 and 12 right there. So really nice increase to your crit and crit damage, so you're going to be a really big hit with the ultimate with this. And with the whole setup, you're going to be able to get those stacks fairly easily with her, especially when you have the whole physical team built. And so that's kind of the core reason. I mean, we can kind of look at the fixed keys here as well. Fixed key 1 for each enemy with laceration in the field, increases movement speed. Not a big deal. I mean, I'm trying to think of her more of her bossing than anything else. There will be uses in AoE because she has the ability to AoE apply the lacerations, but I'm really looking at her more for doing a lot of damage to platoon bosses, because that's where it's kind of the most important to think of this when it comes to min-maxing. So nothing too crazy there. Fixed key 2, Vortex Cleave. If this skill only hits one enemy, increases damage dealt by 20%. So if you're doing the platoon bosses, that just makes it more damage. So that's a pretty easy one there. At start of battle, increases contamination gauge by 3 points. That one's pretty standard, a lot of dolls, and that makes it where you can utilize that first skill right off the bat to get those initial stacks of laceration. Then you have the fixed key 4. When health is below 50%, increases healing received by 30%. You should have better planning on your sustain if you're going to need that. I don't feel like that one would be very useful. And then fixed key 5. At the end of action, if there are enemies with laceration within a 2-tile radius, on self gains area defense for 1 turn. You're going to want to be close to the enemy, so this one I could see being valuable on certain bosses, just making it where she can take a little bit more of a hit. I see that one being better than her fixed key 4 for extra healing. And then fixed key 6. When enemies with laceration dies, increases attack by 4% for self up to a maximum of 20%. And so those are the kind of keys. Nothing too crazy there. Nothing that I see as extraordinary that you really need to think about for her. She has a great common key. Crit plus 5% increases physical damage received for all enemies within a 3-tile radius of self. She's always going to be close to the enemies because that's kind of part of her kit. So this one you just put on her, and all your physical damage dealers are going to do more damage with that common key. Now, the big thing is that it's really coming down to is planning your pulls in the future on the standard banner. And it's all about these dupes. Is realistically what the thought process is. If you are wanting to invest in Yuhi and Diane with all the new knowledge we know on the physical teams, the 2 breakpoints that I see being quite important here are 1 and 4, just for like really good breakpoints. 6 is also really, really good, but I don't really like pushing all the way to 6 on the standard units because it's always a potential to get a lost 50-50 and pick it up. The only one that I think is like you want to really push the V6 is Moza Nagant. So for her, I would, if you're wanting to save up standard pulls, I would try and save up to basically the equivalent of a V4. do this after you've basically gotten settled with the current standard units, because it's going to probably be a while before we get her. Don't just hold on to them and gimp your count out. Make sure you get your account set with the units that you really want to use now based on what we've discussed in the past. But overall, I think she's going to be a great character to save for, and is currently what I am doing on my account. Now, I got my QJ to V3. I got my Tololo to V2. I know a lot of people are not at that point. If you're trying to go on that meta level of kind of making sure your standard characters are good to go, I wouldn't start saving until you at least get that. Or if you're wanting to go heavy in the lightning direction, until you get V4 on your Moza Nagant. Because we still have quite a bit of time until we get Yuhi. It's probably going to be like around that 8 to 12 months away, unless they really shuffle things up. So you don't need to completely 100% save heavily right this second. But this is just kind of give you some thought process on why you might want to start holding on to your standard pulls again, even though we have the rate up banner. And we always have the case that they could add another character to the standard banner in the future. And so even though we have the rate up, you may just want to start saving them once you feel you are in a good spot on your standard characters. It's not going to hurt to not use them, because you can always dump those pulls in the future. Like one example is when Springfield comes out, if I have not lost my 50/50s and gotten myself a V4 Tololo, I may pull to get a V4 Tololo at that point, because the V4 on Tololo is really, really good. I just don't think it's necessary at this point. If I do get lucky and get her with lost 50/50s, then I'm good to go. And now I have even more pulls saved up for going for a V6 Faye. But hopefully I can at least get a V4. But I think the big one is at least V1 if you're going to go with the physical team. But yeah, that's just some of my thoughts, and nothing too crazy. And this is just kind of looking at it from a meta perspective. Don't feel like you need to save your standards. If you want to just slowly work your characters up to V6 on your QJs and get your V4 on your Tololos and V6 on Moza Nagant, don't let this stop you from doing that. We will be getting a free copy. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of cover it, since it is something you want to think about at this point. But yeah, if you like my content, if you could like, comment, and subscribe, it really helps. And thanks for watching.